Thank you so much for joining me here today. And the topic of today's session is ethics for UX. And you do have a chat window there if you're attending this live. If you're attending this later, you can always send me an email, frank@experiencedynamics.com. Today, I'm doing a little bit of a different webinar, and I have you here because what I'm going to do is I'm going to send you this PowerPoint afterwards. It's kind of an open source approach to this topic. And the reason is because I think this topic needs to be socialized or needs to be available to a much wider audience than it already is. And there's actually a lot of people in academia that talk about ethics. There's a lot of good information. There's some new books on the topic, but it's not that accessible, I think. And it's also historically got, debated. So to me, it's important that it gets out in the wild. So I want you to give this presentation to your team. I want you to, all you have to do is credit me and it's all yours. You'll get a recording of this. You'll get a PowerPoint as well. Again, the purpose is to get this information beyond just you who have attended today, who think that this is an important topic. This is a topic that everybody needs to understand, especially in today's world, right? We're in this rapidly changing world, and we really need to get this information out there. So my name is Frank Spillers. I'm the CEO, founder, and the Chief Experience Officer for Experience Dynamics. We're a leading user experience consulting firm, been around for 20 years. I teach at the Interaction Design Foundation, which is the largest online UX school in the world. And I also teach at uxinnercircle.com, which is my personal kind of mentoring coaching site. So some of you are already students, and nice to see you. And thank you so much for joining me, everyone. So nice to have you all here. And for those who are watching later, of course, I extend my warmest wishes and greetings to you as well. What are we here to talk about today? Well, the topic is ethics, and we're in this rapidly changing world. This is being recorded in January of 2021. We've just had news that all the big social media giants, including YouTube and many others, have blocked Donald Trump from their platforms. We had the news a few months ago that Google basically fired one of their chief ethicists, a woman who has a background in ethics and is essentially a scholar who they hired to help guide them, and they kind of drove her out. This topic is still wet, as they say. It's not fully baked. It's a topic that needs to be clarified, and more importantly, needs to be operationalized. And that's the point of this webinar, is to get it into your hands. First of all, I want you to be able to tell your team what is UX and ethics, what you can do as a UX designer to influence ethics, and also what new habits or practices, in terms of operationalizing ethics. Like, we really need to start embedding this and doing it. We've got to get it away from the academic, theoretical, debatable, or even strictly legal or philosophical context. It's just, we don't need to be there anymore. We can move on. I'm telling you this, so I hope you agree. That's my read anyway. Let's start by getting the relationship right. Let's start by getting our relationship with technology right. We're addicted to our phones. Our phones have been designed to be highly addictive. Social media, of course, is the most addictive of them all. Banksy, the great street artist, gave us this warning sign many years ago. If you go to China today, to the big cities, the big high-tech cities, this is what it looks like if you're sitting in a restaurant. And in particular, the guys tend to ignore the girls that they're dating or something like that. And the same thing happens all around the world, right? But we're addicted to our phones, right? We're addicted to social media, to Instagram. It's all about the likes. It turns out that Instagram, which is owned by Facebook, did a piece of research that found that when you remove the likes, you increase user satisfaction, because there have been studies to show that there are mental health issues, and specifically anxiety and depression, because they didn't get enough likes. So maybe nobody likes me, that kind of thing, especially with young people. It's actually a big problem. There are a lot of big problems that are eventually going to need to be touched by UX people to solve these issues. And some new solutions are arising. But we tend to get stuck with the tools. Smart speakers, right? What's the problem with smart speakers? The privacy issue. You remember the Amazon speaker that records your conversation and sends it up to a server. So there have just been scandal after scandal. Maybe that's why you're here. Maybe you're here to try and understand more about this. But these are common examples. And what I want to do is separate who we are as humans or our users from the technology. These are just tools. The other thing that I should say is they're just examples of designs. They're not it. Operating systems, mobile phones, the way we communicate, the way we share, the way we socialize, they're just a model, and in a lot of cases, they're not thought out entirely. And so this is about thinking things out from the perspective of the human, right? That Edward T. Hall, the great American anthropologist, told us that technology is just an extension of humans. It's not us. And you don't know that anymore because you hold onto your phone, you put it in your shirt, you put it in your pocket, you hold it close to you, lay it on you, your phone is on you, your tablet, your VR, whatever it is, your speaker is there, we're increasingly being tethered by our technology, but we have to remember it's just a tool. It's an extension. It's not who we are. We need to separate that. It extends our abilities. And by extending our abilities, we have to, make sure that's done ethically. But it's all about the toys, right? That we love our toys. We love the technology. And the reason I bring this up is because in user experience in the field and the methodology, our leading methodology is human-centered design. So in this field, it's important that we focus back onto the user, to the person, and not get stuck on the features. A lot of ethical problems come up because of the worshiping of the technology or the features or the functionality or the implicit rightness of a concept, of a feature. We don't check in with communities. Instagram they did the research on removing the likes, and they pulled the likes off of many countries, many regions for about 6 months, I think it was. And then they put it back, and they put it back because the companies that created these addictive technologies are addicted to their addictive technologies, to their addictive algorithms. They're addicted to it, and the addiction is a financial monetary addiction, and so they don't really care. It's really clear that humans are the reason why we're on this planet. We're not on this planet because of our tools, our toys. We're not designing software and services because of features. We're designing them because of customers. It's time to subordinate technology and elevate the human. This is underlying and should be underlying every UX designer's work. Every UX team, every UX director, every UX effort, every dollar spent on UX should be in elevating the customer, elevating the human. In UX, we try to subordinate technology by focusing on user tasks and goals and user needs, essentially. We say there are no user errors, only designer errors, right? So we take the blame off of the user, right? And the reason we say that is because we can do something about it, right? The designer errors, that means we can change the design and change the outcome. A/B testing, right, is or usability testing can show you that if you change a design, you can change the outcome. You can't just keep calling users stupid or expecting them to be educated and make the excuses that way. Maybe we're saying now in this ethics era of ethics that there are no design dilemmas, only ethical dilemmas. And here's an example that this is how when I say it's all about the toys, this is an example of that. It's like, wow, this guy's sharing his AI-based video compression, tool that's available, and the AI is able to profile the face. But just because we can do that, we'll all be controlling digital puppets of ourselves in the future. I don't know. I hope not. Maybe, but why? We have to ask the question, just because we can create the tool, just because we can hack a user's brain and create addictive social media experiences with notifications and with walls and all these Facebook-like paradigms, which we've all been copying as if they're the word of God, as if they've come down, you have to do it this way, as if operating systems, as if VR as we know it, as if any of these technologies, including Zoom or any of the collaborative technologies, as if that's it, that's all there is. And you're just going to innovate a little bit around the edges. No, innovation is about understanding the humans and honoring the humans and extending the humans' ability with something that empowers their goals and tasks. This guy on this similar example, he's showing the COVID version of this where the AI can profile, in this case, his family's face with and without the mask. Maybe there's a purpose for this, but we've already seen in early 2021, we've seen a whole year of COVID, almost a whole year. And we've seen implementations of, for example, in India, at this point, the government is tracking everyone's location, everyone's. And a friend told me that it actually burned down her phone battery. And so she turned it off. She's in India, a UX designer. In Canada, the government there was using Bluetooth. So in their version, you report yourself what's happening. But the Bluetooth, there was a problem, a bug, and then the reporting was not occurring. So again, we have to dig into ethics, and we can't just wait till afterwards. We have to dig into ethics from the start. Usually in UX, we're protecting users and advocating for them, right? And if we're truly advocating, we should be advocating for their needs and their culture and their values and their history and their need to be included if they're users with disabilities or if they're marginalized users, if they're users that, how would you design for the homeless, for example? So we consult a lot in UX, and we try and align user needs and designs and UIs around a design, and we mostly protect our users ethically, and that's the goal. So let's talk about UX and ethics and what I think you should tell your team. Let's pop a poll, and we have folks joining us here. You should see a poll on your screen there. What do you think about this question? Do technology giants realize their ethical responsibilities? Yes, no, or still a way to go? We'll have a period for question and answer at the end of this live session. So hang tight. If you have some questions, you can maybe start putting them on the chat if you would like. I'll just put a note up there while you're answering the quiz questions today. Sole says yes, but I'm not sure if they care. And I'm sure that cynical comment is because we've seen evidence from the technology giants that, that in a lot of cases they don't care, or they care a little too late, or they care they care on their terms and not on their users' terms or the people that they're serving, right? And I think we can see here, it looks like 74% of people answered. The results here from our poll are 19% said yes, 30% said no, and 51% said still a way to go. The same poll, okay, so interesting, right? Same poll was given, so that a lot less, actually, this was at a Bloomberg event But things have happened since 2018, right? So maybe cynically, our yes jumped up to 18 on this group in this small sample. And this was a room full of people that they asked. And the no was about the same, around 30%. And still a way to go was 53% with our group. So yeah, I think still a way to go is probably the general thing. I mean, even in the UX community, this information is maybe hard to understand, maybe not available, maybe not clearly defined with UX people. They don't teach this in schools. It was only the professional organization of UX, the ACM, which is a Computer Machinery Association. The head of that is actually a former UX guru, someone who's been around for many years, and she's actually a senior director leader at Google. And it was only in 2018 that ethics started to be included in the charter. So this is, it's been a topic that's been around for thousands of years in discussion, but here we have the Twitter CEO saying our inability to address it fast enough, and I think to one of our guests here on the live sessions comment about not caring, that and maybe that, and maybe it's not a case of caring because, everyone cares in a way. Maybe it's a case of something else is in the way, that it took Twitter a couple of weeks before Trump's end of his presidency, when he's almost to be arrested and has been so publicly shamed for his thinking and his governance. Where were they when it really mattered? Where was Uber when sexual harassment and sexual violence was occurring? The city of London asked Uber. I remember I was in London when this was happening, and I was maybe trying to get an Uber, and they said, you might not be able to get an Uber. I think this is 2018. And they said that the city of London had asked Uber that they'll be banned if they don't encourage safety, like to guarantee safety of their people riding. And Uber just kicked back and denied it. And Uber had many, many, many scandals, many sexual harassment scandals. Even the founder, Travis, had to step down, had to put him in the background, and he had to step down and had to get a new CEO, and had to, and it took them the worst ethical violations of humanity in one company for them to change. So how does this happen? This ethical dilemma, and I think it's usually motivated by an aggressive growth strategy. If you look at Facebook and social media in particular, Facebook's growth strategy was created by this guy who actually told us in 2018 that he thought that there was a major mistake that was made, but he also is the guy who created engagement. He's considered to be the guy that created engagement and, in a way, growth hacking and this idea of growth, the whole idea of growth, or a chief growth officer. What are the ethical implications of that? Sorry, I just get that poll out of the way there for you. What are the ethical implications of the growth strategy? And I think it usually comes from an aggressive sales and marketing strategy as well. A lot of it's driven by sales and marketing. An attempt to grow market share. I mean, even just think, like, to make this tangible to UX, you're like, what does this have to do with UX design? That scroll bar, if you put your information left to right, I mean, we know that's a pain for users on the web, right? Left to right scroll bar. Product managers usually just doing their job is usually how this happens, or maximizing engagement. I think we really need to think again what engagement needs and look at it from a legal, ethical, moral perspective, and obviously a user perspective, because the way that Facebook has defined engagement, or hijacked that term, it means that you have to keep the user on site. It's also a Nielsen net ratings term, say time on site around 2008 or 9, that changed to time on site. So you have to, so this hacking someone's attention, right, which is what social media is all about, is it has to keep you there because that's how you're making money. So when you start unraveling this, you run into these issues, right? You look at the like button, you're just trying to spread love and positivity, right? The guy who designed that. So maximizing profits is a major motivating factor. Back to that scroll bar, you know, the infinite scroll that occurs, or the what Facebook does, and I just noticed this the other day. I've sort of been paying attention, but I wasn't conscious of it. When you message someone in Messenger, and it's different on mobile and different on desktop because they've tweaked it for engagement on each of those platforms, they hide the person or group that you've messaged. They bury them. They're gone. They were on your list. Now they're gone. So if you try and send several consecutive messages, and the reason is because then you start looking at your other friends, you see their face, and now you're engaged with them. And it's the same with the content on the site. I stopped using Facebook about a year ago. I've been going on there to message someone. I found myself drawn back into the content. I noticed that addictive design pattern, right? That's there. And it's all very, very carefully tuned and very, very deliberate. But think about even just the way you display a scroll bar. That can be like a dark pattern of its own. If you make it hard to scroll, you can't see it, it acts differently. You know, if you go left to right, as I've said, I want to ask you this now that, thank you and welcome to people late joining. How would you approach the notifications experience, knowing that notifications are A, addictive, B, noise, right? They're just like, and C, overwhelming. Like, how would you design notifications? I mute them on my phone. Yeah, no, that's what you do as a user. No, but how would you as a designer design them? Right, is the question. Give the option to mute it. Okay, as a UX designer. Develop an alerts philosophy. Okay, so kind of unpack alerts and notifications and think about the impact they're having. Like, so if you just boom, 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 you know, you see notifications on some apps and it says 23 or 55, it means nothing, right? You give your users this cue, this you know. What we're seeing now more of is the ability to control your notifications, how many you get, the frequency, to erase them, you know, that kind of thing. So giving your users control is definitely some of the other examples that folks are sharing here on the chat are settings to the user to choose which they see. Was Elias says, good job, Elias. Give an option to choose how many notifications per day. Good job, Isabella. And Emma says more personalized and flexibility over what user sees. Notifications using an engagement tool, so it's unfortunate, says Atefi Radan. Yeah, sure. That's again, defining the problem. But the careful thinking about notifications wasn't there when Apple unleashed notifications in like 2012, 10, 12, something like that. I can't remember when they built it into iOS and everyone got excited about notifications as a global sort of alert mechanism. But the careful thinking, even that you're sharing on the chat, is exactly what we're talking about. And we need to do that with all our features, right? It turns out, and this is what we need to know, is that AI is showing us very clearly it's not value neutral. You know, that our designs are showing us that that there are people behind those designs, right? And one of the biggest problems with all designs is assumption. It's the speculated usage. Oh, I think users are going to do this, or speaking on behalf of users, well, you know, the users are going to do this. Like, based on what? How do you know? You know, maybe it's, you don't ask users, you don't do field studies, which is how you find out what users do and need and want and think and believe and more about them. Or you don't test, right? So many organizations test. It should just be a common thing, user testing. And the third one, which I love the name of this, I call the ego-centered design, but I love this new term that Professor Ricardo Martins at Georgia, I think he's at the university there, had said that that it's belly button centered design, right? So myself, And it's just hilarious, right? And so you go out here and you go stakeholder-centered design, but notice beyond these rings, partners, suppliers, the local community, anyone who's affected by your system, it's that bigger picture view that we need to take for when we talk about inclusion. And it looks like somebody found the drawing tool. So how bad designs usually happen is this notion that I'm right, and users are wrong. This is typical of managers and directors who don't appreciate what UX people do. Or it's just the plain old familiarity. I'll give you an example. When I was last in Silicon Valley, I used my mapping app. And in Silicon Valley, a lot of the names of the roads are Spanish names because it's formerly northern Mexico there, basically. So everything, California, San Diego, San Francisco, Santa Clara, like these are Spanish names. And what was interesting is near the Apple, I think I was using Apple Maps or maybe Google Maps, but they're all in the same area. They're near it was actually Apple Maps. Was it Cupertino? Anyway, it was near Apple and near Google in Silicon Valley. And I noticed that the street names were pronounced by the mapping tool correctly, Santa Clarita or something like that with an accent. I noticed back home in Portland that there's a boulevard named Cesar Chavez Boulevard. They renamed it. It's called 39th Avenue, and they named it to Cesar Chavez. And the map cannot pronounce that. Cesar Chavez, and all the other streets near me that have Spanish pronunciations are not able. The maps are not able. So it reminded me that why is the one in Silicon Valley? It's because the people that work in these companies drive on these very familiar streets, and they are very familiar. They want to hear it pronounced correctly, so that got put in there. Whereas pronunciation of other things, or a speaker that doesn't understand any other accent other than a white male basically voice, which is how all the voice recognition software, including a Microsoft HoloLens version, the first version, including the first versions of Alexa, and all this voice recognition has this ethnocentric bias, right? They only understood. Now it's the same with the algorithms. That's telling us that they're not neutral. The way that the machine learning happens, the way that algorithms train themselves and do that learn off of training sets is very important. And it's very important to build in inclusion up front. That's a key message. So we usually stick to our comfort zones, to the rules that we know. I know them, and I haven't learned, and you haven't learned them. So too bad, right? That's the way an engineer who isn't thinking about users thinks. They're like, an engineer's like, oh, I know the rules. Like, what's your problem? I know how to set up a server. And this is how bad design happens, or we know best. It's our job to know. The arrogance of that, or your boss expecting you as a UX designer to know that. That's not how good UX happens. So the question is, how are we deciding? We need to ask our teams, how are we deciding? What's important to our users? What is an MVP? Who's deciding that the viable product, the minimal viable product, who's deciding what that is? It should come from the users, not from internal dev priorities. And so many organizations I work with come to me with MVPs defined, and they go, can you just validate? Can you just like make this UX-y, and I'm like, well, first of all, you need to come back off of the belly button centered version of MVP. And we need to, understand what users' priorities are. So the question is, are we creating problems downstream? I like to say that every design reflects a decision that went into it. And you could say this is the same thing for AI, garbage in, garbage out, in terms of algorithms. Examples of this are the racist Twitter bot that Microsoft launched, a Twitter bot a few years back, and some folks sent hateful messages to it, and it turned into a racist bot. Recently, Apple launched their credit card. It favors men. So you have even the co-founder of Apple, Steve Wozniak, said it. He's still an employee of Apple. He's the co-founder with Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak. said that this is a problem, as did another, one of the co-founders of Basecamp and the guy who founded Ruby on Rails. Also discovered this and blogged about it. Same amount of credits, same credit score with their partners, and they got much higher amount of credit, and their partners did not. And there's also Amazon hiring bot favored men over women, the name of the person. So there's a lot that the algorithm, it's like if we don't build in ethical design and ethical thinking into it, we can get into problems. A transphobic example might be like, in a forum asks, are you male or female on a forum? And even how that forum is designed or how you ask about non-binary or non-gender conforming individuals, for example, the wording of that needs to be properly done. I'm going to show you the cartoon version of confirmation bias. Is probably one of the most important biases to understand. This is the cartoon version. Literally the first link that agrees with what you already believe, completely supports your viewpoint without challenging it in any way, is an example of confirmation bias. I'll go back to this. This is some guidelines that Microsoft includes in their inclusive design tips for AI specifically. Does your algorithm build and reinforce popular preferences? It should be stereotypes as well. Does it evolve dynamically as your customers change and as the world changes? So maybe in your country, there's a very bad thing going on, but maybe something happens like in South Sudan, for example, there's no longer a war. And I know of an organization, one of my users actually, that is trying to advocate that women's voices be included in the new government of Sudan under the peace process. So an example of a changing world. In your AI, does it have more diverse and inclusive view of the world? So your AI needs attitudes that build on inclusion. But I think we also need inclusive business models, that ethics will challenge your business model. Marketing attitudes will be challenged if you dive into ethics and UX. This is the toughest one of all. There's a book there called Platform Capitalism, which talks about these platforms like Google, Facebook, and the big platforms that have the biggest problems with ethics, but they also have more money and more power and more influence than most countries in the world, actually. The 75% of all businesses are more powerful than any government, basically, I think is one statistic I saw recently, which is unbelievable. So a lot of the things we can learn, though, from these giants are really, really interesting. Now, ironically, as I was putting together my ethics and UX webinar, not this one, but a previous one leading up to this, this guy took the registration for the webinar, promoted it by passing it through his site, where you had to register to his site to register for my webinar. And then he kicked it out to Eventzilla, which is what I was using for the webinar. And the webinar was actually sold out. So he was harvesting people's email addresses by promoting my webinar. And it's an ethics webinar of all ironies, right? So-called growth hacking can get you in trouble because you're like, oh, at any cost, I'm going to create problems. Now, I wanted to mention that this guy is in India, and a lot of you are on the phone in India, and a lot of devs are Indian, really smart guys and women. The reason I wanted to mention this is because nobody talks about the fact that ethics, as we talk about ethics in the United States or these platforms that are in the United States, it's different country to country. I actually ended up, and this is funny, the chat here, I said to him, find another way to gather user registration data, improve your emotional value, because your current model is morally bankrupt and you'll go out of business. There's no way the guy's going to stay in business if he just like opportunistically harvests people. It's like, come on. And he goes, oh, how do you think we'll earn money to survive? He says, again, because what's happening in emerging markets, India, China, Brazil, particularly India and China, which are, by the way, 2 point whatever it is billion people on our planet of 7 billion people currently. These are large markets with very serious futures, right? and a lot of smart people investing a lot in AI, Indian government, Chinese government investing huge in AI. And I actually ended up, so I thought that was interesting that he's using the Silicon Valley logic, because a lot of the emerging markets are copying. If you go to China, for example, in the big cities, Shenzhen or Shanghai, you'll find all the young people there that are in IT and tech and UX, they're thinking like they're in Silicon Valley. They're like, Silicon Valley's the model. Well, get out of my way. How do you think I'm going to make money? And we need to question the validity of this. But the other point I wanted to make about his nationality is that we also need to question our cultural version of ethics, because ethics in India or in Russia or in China, it is very different. The copywriting culture, property, copywriting, and the law are very different. For example, in Russia, it's very common for authors to give away free books, just like I'm giving away this webinar, right? I'm open sourcing these slides for you, because in that culture, that's common. There is no copywriting culture. There is no, like in America is overly, everything's like, you can't turn around without the law being in your way. Everything is about law in America. And no one talks about the need to understand ethics cross-culturally. So I think I'm just introducing that as an interesting side point. Let's go to UX designers and how they can influence this problem. So what is this problem? And I think for me, product managers, like we're down here, this conversation, UX designers. On this column, we have, politicians, regulators, we have executives, boards, business models, business teams, research teams, architecture decisions, very important, right? What a business team has you design, what a research teams uncover, and what they bring back if you even do user research, like do field studies, which you should do. Field studies and user testing in UX are the two ways that you can safeguard your ethics. If you do consistent field research and user testing, you're already doing user advocacy and you're already bringing that in. And the more you do that, the more you'll at least have the voice of the customer. So when it comes to MVPs and when it comes to defining features, at least there's user advocacy in the mix, right? And that's what we can do. But I actually think product managers, devs have a role to play. The thing is, everybody owns this problem, but at different levels, right? So a CEO can say, oh yeah, no, we're not doing the ethic. We don't care, right? And just, the reason why Twitter didn't ban Donald Trump earlier, they were making money from his constant addiction to their platform, But I think product managers can play a pivotal role because they guide UX designers and devs, and they push back up to the business team, which pushes back up to the executive team, et cetera, et cetera. So I actually think product managers can help own this, but everybody owns it. One of the things that we need to do as UX designers is avoid these 5 naivetes. The 5 naivetes are, well, it's inevitable, so it's coming. That is a problem. It's not, the future is not inevitable. Otherwise, we would be in flying cars. We would have had Google Glass by now. Where's the Google Glass? Where's the VR when you need it for COVID, collaboration, learning, et cetera? Oh, it's coming, is it? Okay, I hope it's coming. I've been around VR for 25 years now. And in the last 5 years, the new wave of VR, I was told it was coming by UX people. Where is it, guys? Maybe there are a few questions we haven't answered. We can't even get online learning right. And it's been already 15 or 20 years with online learning platforms. And you can see how miserable they are for COVID learning. Neutrality. So it's neutral. Oh, the algorithm's neutral. So it'll find its own solution. No, don't believe that. Utopia. Well, we love technology. Again, it's the toys, right? It's a great toy. It's already here, so we should just use it. Trust in algorithms. So tech's going to find a solution similar to the neutrality. Tech is unbiased. This computer said so. The data shows it. So no, we can't fall for that. And finally, people will adapt, build, and they will come. No. We know in UX that's naive. Let's look at some examples. So you type, why are people black? And you get some interesting, you get this,
दिल में
why are
पूछा
black,
नहीं.
and then you get all these biased results down here, right? All these stereotypes about black people in America. It's like blue and pink for girls and boys, right? It's called gender signaling. You type beautiful women on Google and you see this. And the issue here is the algorithm racially biased? You use DuckDuckGo, which I've been using for the last year or so, and it's a great search engine. You can add it to Chrome. It doesn't track you. You see these results differently, but these screenshots were taken in late 2020. The work that was done to uncover Google's algorithms bias and racial bias about what's beautiful, in other words, a white woman is beautiful over any other ethnicity. Thanks for the markup. Whoever's having too much fun with that, I'll just erase that. So beautiful men, interestingly enough. And for men, it's all like mostly like, well, all white men on this one and mostly all white men on this one too. So it gets even worse when you type beautiful men, but you get the point. And it's a good concrete example that even Google knows this. The biggest problem that we have going into the future is that our algorithms learn out of control. We need to do agency by design. Agency means that the user has control of their destiny, right? When we talk about, for example, designing in VR, we talk about agency. Can I go this way? Can I not do anything? Do I just look at it? What's my agency? And Christopher Wiley says we need privacy by design. We need platforms adopting choice enhancing design. And he's talking platforms. So this is about the big tech. It's in the spirit of social media, because this is the guy who created Cambridge Analytica with Steve Bannon, which is how we got into a lot of the current mess in the United States. So banning dark patterns, giving the user what they need, prohibiting undue influence, for example, long-term addiction, and avoiding harm principles and abusability audits he calls for. What is an abusability audit? We'll talk about it in a minute. There are three areas that you can help. One is rules. So rules contain decisions, choices, logic of a system, and the intent. And most rules victimize the user by lack of transparency. Users don't know at the UI level. There's just a study done about terms of service policies, like almost like privacy policies. And they listed them all out and to see how long it would take. And there are some policies that would take 45 minutes or 2 hours to read them all if you actually read them. Just crazy. No, and nobody does it. 98% of users say they don't read terms of service. So what is that? Rule interpreting is the enemy of good UX. In other words, in this case, in Amazon, too many attempts. There's a rule here. You tried too much. At least it's giving you a countdown and telling you that, right? A lot of systems just do the rule and don't tell you. So like you're a lock on a door, like a digital lock, you're pushing it, doesn't work. You put the wrong code in, doesn't work. Nothing happens. And the rule is you have to wait 3 seconds, or you have to wait 10 seconds, or come back in 15 seconds, So in addition to rules, control, giving users control. How are we supporting their goals? Do they really have control? Like when you cancel these days, things don't cancel. You hit a cancel on a dialogue, nothing happens. Used to be when I got involved in computers 25 years ago, 30 years ago, you would close something, it would close. You would shut down your computer, it would shut down. What happened to that? Where is that? And the same on our websites. When we cancel, do we really cancel? When you unsubscribe from a service, do you really unsubscribe? Or do they come back and bill you later? And then, of course, managing, like Facebook has taken like 100 iterations maybe to get the privacy thing. It's better now, but the trust is so gone that, in this example of Apple, they're telling you your screen time, but who says that YouTube is bad for me? I use it for educational things. So why is YouTube considered entertainment and then that's bad? Why, Apple lets you choose not to get this, so I turned it off, but it's so silly because it's not following the principle of control of letting the user decide what constitutes essentially addiction. They're doing this for digital health, but it's just ridiculous. They're not actually honoring users' needs. Power is the third one. So rules, control, and power. Do we take power away from user or community with this product, service, feature, behavior? We talked about notifications and alerts. Are we giving power, and is power wanted, right? Does the group that you're trying to help, do they want what you're giving them? And now are we reducing it, and how are we reducing it? So again, like to me, redefining engagement is a starting point for this. Human-centered design ethics say that we need to change our beliefs, our approaches, our practices, and how we evaluate. So our beliefs have to include justice, inclusion, right? Including people that are left out of traditionally of conversations. And also think about the wellness, the well-being of our users. We're talking about notifications, alerts. Those are where that digital addiction starts, because they start tapping your brain and saying, come on, come on, like a dog, right? It's a Skinnerian. B.F. Skinner was a manipulative psychologist in the 1960s. And he had a philosophy that you can just train a dog to hit a bell and get a treat. And he kind of applied it to humans. And these experiences that keep us addicted, like, come on, like, are like that. That we need to be human-centered and community-centered, and say how we're making stuff, how we test stuff, and add the scrutiny and rigor. And I'll show you in a second how to do that. But ethical UX design starts with these questions. Were users included? Who are these stakeholders, these users? Did we give them consent? Is this right or wrong morally? Do business interests prevent us from committing to ethical UX? That's the elephant in the room that no one's talking about. And it's because it's so hard to change. When you get addicted to making a ton of money from an addictive UI, it's very hard to tell an executive or product manager to change that, right? What are the benefits, the downsides, legal, PR, political repercussions? That's a good one. A lot of disability accessibility lawsuits are increasing so that users with disabilities are being included. Cultural upsides and downsides, understanding deeply a culture sensitivity, and also looking out into the future, that we go there. So new habits, what do we do? Let me ask you a quick question. This question is related to driverless cars. What did Americans say in this survey, 2017? Safety, cost, hacking, or boredom? What were the most concerning? All right. So so we have 42% saying safety, 13% saying cost, 26% saying hacking, and 18% saying boredom. The answer in this is a survey of several thousand people, and again, it's just perception because it's a survey. It was hacking, actually. It was hacking. 26% of you said hacking. I would have never guessed that myself. I would have said safety, like most of you. Interesting, right? So this reminds us that we need to check in with our users. Who are we impacting? So the user, the community, historical, cultural, political, environmental. There's a movie documentary called Traveling While Black. They also have a VR piece on that. And if you watch that movie or read that book, read the documentary or play the VR piece. It's like 10 minutes, I think, the VR piece. And I think it's about an hour, 45 minutes. You'll see this is a guy who tells a story that when he was younger, they would travel, they would go on holiday, they would travel across the country in the US, and they could only stay at certain hotels, had to be very careful while they were traveling because it was in the South of America where you were like racially not allowed to do that. Here's another question for you, since we got you awake, and we're going to go to more questions that you're going to hopefully ask of me if you're on the live session. If you're watching this later, you can email them to frank@experiencedynamics.com. what country gave all the rivers in the country legal rights of a person, right? And my point of asking you this question is to say, the world is changing. When I say look out 10 years into the future, don't assume that this trend, which also exists in like 3 or 4 other countries, there's only one country that created it across the spectrum. The answer actually is Bangladesh gave legal rights to all rivers. And it's because the rivers were overflowing with plastic and clogged up. So they gave the river the rights of a person, which in the United States, corporations have the rights of a person from a law that was passed in like 1885. It gives corporations the rights of a person. It's absolutely crazy, but it protects the corporation as if it's a person. That's a real thing. And it's also why a lot of crazy profiteering is justified. Well, you know, I'm protecting the corporation. Don't care about the environment or the people. New Zealand actually passed just one river has that protection. So it's to say that, you know, even if you've never heard of that before, it's to say that we're moving rapidly into a very changing world, not just complex, but rapidly changing. And you need to have your ears to the ground, and you need to be open to what your community has experienced, what your users have experienced, and where they're going now. So for me, that means with returning COVID, what do people think about your experience? What can you do to support a post-COVID, you know, or the next pandemic to prevent that, or the next environmental catastrophe that is coming down the line? And then to ask the question, at what cost? You know, are we doing this harm, right? The technique to use is called red team, blue team. And it's basically like an ethical expert review or heuristic evaluation. You have 2 teams, and I think there are people in your organization or maybe who you work with, there's always that one person who can find what's wrong, or is highly analytical, or they know how to rip stuff apart, or they enjoy it. They actually enjoy finding what's wrong. And those people are great assets here, because those people that are motivated that way can be your friend. They can help you. But you can basically, you have a team, preferably a team that doesn't really know the product, isn't involved with it, and maybe even an outside expert, you know, like an ethicist, like Google hires ethicists. The big companies hire ethicists, whether they listen to them or whether they give them authority, is the topic of another conversation. But red team, blue team is one technique. And when you look at what could go wrong, what could possibly go wrong? Bring user concerns into it from doing field research, ethnography. Ethnography means culture study. So by studying culture, you can bring in some of these very real stories of users. Look at the past and the present legal precedents. Talk to activists. Look at their opinions. For example, privacy activists are a great source of information. They actually track the issue of privacy religiously. Look at other countries or regions. For example, there's a Finnish woman who created the GDPR for the privacy European Union disclosure of cookie tracking. Look at the Scandinavian countries tend to be like already built-in ethics. So look there. How are they doing it? How would they do it? And historical and cultural factors. You can also use what's called a pestle analysis. We also use this in localization projects. So localization, it means shipping software globally around the world and making it fit to that country, right? Localization, right? Most people think, oh, you mean translation? No, I don't mean translation. I mean what's being called culturally sensitive design. You know, if you don't understand political, economic, social, technological, and legal and environmental issues, that's what the pestle stands for, you will miss out on fitting the product or experience or service to that culture. And it's the same for our users in the country that we live in. When you start having the former chief technologist of the FTC, Ashan Soltani, he said, we need this abusability testing, right? Also the current FTC, that's the Regulatory Commission, Federal Trade Commission in the United States of the US government. He said that he's taking complaints and examining dark patterns. Now, how successful this will be, right? I don't think government is going to, like, you know, when I saw this, in the last month or so, having seen it, I saw so many dark patterns. What is a dark pattern, right? It's not conclusive. How are you going to test it? like GDPR. So I think as UX designers, I think we can influence from the ground up a little bit. The abusability testing, though, that he's encouraging is important. And this is a stress test. So some of those questions I just shared, it's basically ripping it apart and abusing it and making the algorithm, digest racist, sexist, transphobic, whatever thing you can teach a societal problem, give that algorithm that and try and get it to break, essentially. And first ask, right? I think when you abusability test, ask those critical folks, ask your users, ask SMEs, subject matter experts. SMEs are a great source of information. Lawyers and intersectional UX experts. What do I mean by intersectional? I mean that it's a UX person that cares about racial justice, gender equality, LGBTQI plus rights, environmental justice, accessibility, and sociability, right? So they care about users and rights. That's what I mean by intersectional. Talk to those people, ask them. Scan ethical violations, map them against your ethical goals, and then evaluate your algorithms as well, stress testing. This is part of abusability testing. Remember that it takes all levels, the algorithm, the UI level, the product service level, and the business team level. This is a great resource if you're looking for one, a new book that just came out, Design for Cognitive Bias. And he goes into all the different biases that lead to unethical designs. You can also learn from the giants. Many of you have seen The Social Dilemma, and maybe you have not been critical of Silicon Valley and startup culture, but for me, we need to put the spotlight because that's where this is coming from, this thinking. And especially if you're an emerging market like my friend, I actually ended up having a pleasant conversation with that guy that tried to basically monetize the ethics webinar. I actually had a pleasant chat with him, and it went from sort of tense to I was like, look, this is just not you're not going to make money this way. I understand you're trying to make money. Yeah, sure. But, think about your experience that you're doing. This is not right, and had a pleasant chat. And he was, he was very respectful. He honestly believed that he could use this kind of, it's like a growth hack. The other thing I would leave you with is read about ethics. There's some great books here. You can, whatever lens interests you most, race, gender, the algorithm, the AI book here this is a wonderful book if you need to learn more about AI, artificial unintelligence. Future Ethics is a wonderful, easy to read book as well. I highly recommend it. And Design Justice, if you're looking for a go-to for all this kind of community-centered design practices. Also learn about value-sensitive design. Not a lot of UX people know about it. This is a more academic book from academics, but some of their tools and techniques have been well researched, and you can incorporate them into your process. So it doesn't replace human-centered design. It just adds another lens at looking at people's values and looking at values as a design piece. So we're up on our time, and let's take some questions here. You can put them on the chat if you're live here, or you can also open up your mic and just talk to me there. Easier than chatting, whatever suits you. Amma says that's the devil's advocate, the abusability testing. And yeah, absolutely. Those people that like to play devil's advocates, I think we have a new job for them. Right. By the way, I am going to send you this PowerPoint and this recording, and I'm going to send you the unbranded version. This is like the first draft here. You've seen the logo. This is my company, Experience Dynamics, but I'm going to send you the no logo version, the unbranded version. And again, what I want you to do is I want you to use this presentation as a resource and present it to your team to give the same presentation. I'll send you, again, the recording, maybe even a transcript, a written transcript, but you'll have that resource and then the PowerPoint as well. And my intention of doing that is that it's no point me having this information or us who have attended here today or who are watching it later. I think all UX designers need to be able to quickly and clearly provide some new solutions for this problem. So the question about how about governance bodies' responsibility in enforcing ethics and rules? I mean, absolutely. Is there a role for government? Do we need government to enforce ethics and rules? Yes, and I think what we need is a larger commitment to ethics from the general community. It's like, just like with all the social media channels, Facebook and Twitter have been the two most destructive to American democracy and in helping the Trump administration, categorically helping them with election fraud in 2016, with the culture war that Bannon introduced through Cambridge Analytica. These are documented, firsthand source, like been to court. We know this now. We know this categorically, but did they do anything about it? No. So the problem with government is that government doesn't quite understand how technology works. So you have the problem with technologists is they typically defend the technology and they say, no, in Silicon Valley, for example, the author of the book, Artificial Unintelligence, mentions that there are people who are libertarians. Libertarian is a political ideology, and part of it, what it says is it's your own responsibility. Don't censor people, even people that are Nazis who are giving hate speech, and don't censor. If you censor them, you censor everybody. Yeah, I understand but that thinking, she mentions that in that book, tends to infect. So yes, we absolutely need government intervention. We need regulation of this issue so that it doesn't come down to, should I even vote, or are we just we're in the Orwell, George Orwell 1994 situation of not having any control, and it's all algorithms controlling our lives. I think first of all, let's get ethics on the table. Let's show the role of UX people, how UX people can actually influence. We're not the only one. We don't have that much power in organizations. Even UX directors and CXOs, chief experience officers, don't have that much power, right? But we have to start, I think, by being on the same page and understanding collectively what the issues are, and being collectively supportive of the users and the communities that we serve, right? And is there a real life abusability testing study example you can walk us through? Any tips and tricks regarding its planning, execution, or documentation? That's a really, really good question. And the answer, there's not one that I can share with you, but maybe that's a good one for a future, meeting or a group, discussion. I have monthly master classes on various topics with uxinnercircle.com, which is my kind of mentoring group, and might be something for our group there. And someone else is saying, I would love to know more about abusability testing. Yeah, I think there is a company that's offering abusability testing as a service. And a lot of the focus is on just beating up the algorithms and testing it internally. So almost like approaching accessibility, just looking at the code level and fixing code so it's accessible to browsers. But with accessibility and with abusability testing, you should bring in the user's perspective, should be brought in, like to know what you should test for abuse. Like, what is abuse? Like, ask the question, like, what is abuse? Okay, well, you can say, okay, not sexist, not racist, not transphobic, inclusive for users with disabilities. You could start with those, right? But the specific issues that impact the community or the users that you serve, it is important to bring that into the abusability testing. A lot of the big tech companies, a lot of these platforms, they already say they do abusability testing. I think a lot of them, for example, Twitter, they've been trying to get their algorithm to change and so forth and so on, but they just try and do it inside the little box of like QA. So, and they're not, you have to step outside of the box to know what problems might happen downstream or in the future, or you have to go to the pain. you have to go to the victims of that social injustice. For example, racism. You can't just say, okay, racism or sexism, we just don't look at, tell the algorithm, don't look at blue, don't look at pink, don't look at black, don't look at white. You can't just do that. You have to understand the nuance. Just like with user research, you have to understand the nuance of what a user wants to do with a feature or an MVP or a functionality. You know, you have to understand what's happening with them. Like, what's the context? Why is this important, this feature? Why is this workflow, this, you know, next step that they're taking? Why is it important, you know? And bring that to the abusability audit to make it more realistic, I think. Someone is asking, how can we draw the line between an attractive design and an addictive feature? Oh dear. So I think all design should be attractive, just right. So aesthetics are extremely important. Don't believe any UX person who tells you otherwise. We know this. The science tells us we judge things aesthetically before we actually have a chance to use them. What we need, though, is the aesthetic with the interaction design or with the you know, utility, the ability to easily use it. And in terms of differentiating it as an addictive feature, well, we have a lot of experience now from the social media giants about addictive, you know, and also, I mean, Apple tries to be an ethical company. Apple has many aspects of their experience that need to be fixed, that are broken, that they're profiting from the addiction from in terms of addictive features. And it's clear to me that this digital wellness thing is just lip service. No one in Silicon Valley is actually, no one seems to be consulting. You know, I've read three or four books about digital addiction. And there are people, for example, who practice, who are therapists and psychologists and, you know, people who practice out in the community who deal with children with digital addiction, with device addiction, internet addiction. So going to them as subject matter experts might be a good starting point, as well as to examining families and people and users. So what constitutes, I think that the issue here about, forget attractive because it has to be attractive, but addictive as an addictive feature, there needs to be an ethical commitment from all levels of the company. That's why, you know, for example, understanding this information that I presented today is a starting point so that everyone goes, what is it? You know, like, what's the, because a lot of ethics information is academic. Like, the academics are all over this topic. They've written books about it. They study it. They talk about it. They have, you know, it's great, but academia and industry don't really get together. They don't. People in industry do not look at academic stuff and go, oh yeah, very good, I'll read that research paper. That's not how it works. And so there needs to be a bridge between that information. And so the addictive features, you have to commit to an ethical UX policy. And you have to look at, are you following a pattern, which could be a dark pattern or an addictive pattern? Is this pattern, I don't think anyone's documented addiction in patterns, in UI patterns yet. I might be wrong about that. The dark patterns have been well documented. There's a very interesting e-commerce study on dark patterns in e-commerce, and it documents many good examples of UI issues with dark patterns specifically. But addictive patterns, I think it's a new one. First of all, I think though the reason I say they have to take like a business level, like a higher level, all levels of the organization, from developer, product manager, all the way to CEO, board, stockholders, if it's a publicly traded company, you know, that kind of thing, is because a lot of the growth hacking and also aggressive UX or addictive UX comes from yeah, we can make money. It's like the guy that said to me, I can make money. How am I going to eat? You know, I'm trying to eat. Like, how am I supposed to make money? And so, you know, there are alternative models though. And like one of the models, Jeff Bezos, the reason that Amazon took so many years to become profitable was because Jeff Bezos was basically saying it's not about the profit, it's about the long game. You know, so it's not all companies have that wisdom, but to be able to play the long game and to be able to to make sure you're defining where the profit's going to come from. I think if you're providing something that contributes to wellness, to the needs of the users, then they'll come back. But if you're deliberately using your algorithm to see, oh, this user did this or this user did that, and then your algorithm is like changing content or changing navigation, is essentially hacking their attention. That's where it's become a problem, and so you have, depression and anxiety, Facebook users, Instagram users, Twitter users, they have addictive behaviors, they have anxiety and depression, not to mention that their ability to communicate tends to be biased by that interaction. It becomes polarized. Like, oh, you see this in America, like, in the last few years, people can't talk about anything without it becoming like black or white, and it's because Facebook is constantly showing you there's a threat. This has actually been studied as well. So I think following dark patterns is an important thing. Looking more into that, I think it's a good call to action for all of us. Like, what are addictive features? How do we map those as patterns and avoid those? What's the alternative? And how can we make the business case, instead of saying, yeah, we've got a slot machine or we've got, essentially a drug that we've created with this UI or this experience, how can we balance it? How can we give users control? How can we provide the safe space? It's the place where my daughter went to Finland last year, and she went to the public library, and they had like a safe, like a quiet space in the public library, just a place where you just go and it's like quiet. What's the equivalent of that in social media, if that's relevant to you, or what is the equivalent of giving users control so that more like in B2B, if you're designing web applications for B2B, for example, or service experiences, it's more like how can you help the user not get stressed out? Because there are these rules about COVID, or you have to shop this way, or you can't do that, or in B2B, you have this workload, this work queue, some other users asking you a comment, you never replied to that one, a little bit like Slack can sometimes get like that. And so it's more like, how can you, that's a well-being thing, is how can you lower the stress? How can you make it so that there's not like a constant, boom, 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 bombardment, and I think that's where we need to start with looking at what constitutes non-addictive, but supportive. Like, how do we empower, but not addictive, and let's see, let's take one last question. Yes, Atefi, do you want, if I'm saying your name right, do you want to open your mic? Mr. Radan. He says it's easier to just talk instead of typing. I understand. And there was another comment from Kansu's. Thank you, Frank. Definitely uncovering what abuse means to users would be an insightful way to start. Yeah, thanks for that comment. That's Tefe. Did you want to share with us your question? Okay, maybe you can. I'll put my email here, frank@experiencedynamics.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me. You can check out that YouTube channel. You'll also hopefully get an email if it gets through your spam box with a recording for this. If you're watching this afterwards, thank you so much for your attention. Thank you everyone for joining me today. And thank you also for taking up, I hope, taking up the mission of sharing this presentation, giving this presentation. I'm going to remove the branding, just attribute it to Frank Spillers, CEO of Experience Dynamics, and that's fine. And it's open source, so hopefully we can get this information out and build on it, and maybe develop some heuristics for addictive features, maybe develop some better protocols for abusability testing. And at least I hope that you, from this webinar, have got a handle or an understanding of ethics. And I hope that you also found it valuable. I'll throw up actually my last poll for you is, how valuable was this webinar for you? Hopefully you should see that poll. Yeah, so getting on the same page about ethics, demystifying it, we can all do it. We're all part of the solution. Things are going to change. Governments are going to change things. Users are going to change things. The world is going to change. We just know that, right? So just getting ready and being useful UX people doing our part. Thank you all so much as well. And thank you all very much. I will just give another minute so you can finish the poll. And more than very useful. Okay, thank you so much, Jalali, and hope to see you guys on a future webinar. And stay safe, be well, take care. It looks like 96% said very useful. Yay! That's what I like to hear. Thank you all so much, you guys. Take care and happy UXing. Stay safe and be well. Thanks, everyone.